A very good afternoon to all of you. Before I start, let me thank Dr. J. Krishnan and his colleagues for having given me an opportunity to be here and deliver a topic which is quite mundane but which is day to day. And I have taken it a case-based approach. So we all know cesarean rates are skyrocketing and also the complications following the procedure. And cesarean section, for all of you know, is the most common procedure universally, and because it has been made very safe related to the advances in anesthesia, operative techniques and drugs. But complications occur due to overleaking of vessels or not resorting to proper aseptic precautions or not anticipating complications and not recognizing injuries to structures. So with that, I have taken some scenarios which I have seen over years, and the first one is a 30-year-old lady, a case of PCOS, conceived following treatment of infertility, had preeclampsia, and a cesarean section was done for failed induction. And she complains of severe pain and swelling in the right lower limb after 48 hours after cesarean section. She weighs 85 kg. So what may be the diagnosis? How will you manage? This case has 3 moderate risk factors for thromboembolism, and she has an emergency cesarean section in labor, she is obese, and she has preeclampsia. So she belongs to the high risk category. So let us see what is high risk. See, one is low risk, we treat with ambulation, that is uncomplicated pregnancy who had cesarean section and no risk factors. Moderate risk factor are either age more than 35, obesity with a BMI more than 30, parity more than 3, gross varicose veins, current infection, preeclampsia, immobility of more than 4 days, major current illness, and emergency cesarean section in labor. So this is the one. These are the 3 factors that she had, and she is the candidate for a thromboprophylaxis. And why we require thromboprophylaxis for preventing deep vein thrombosis? Pregnancy has a 6-fold increase in deep vein thrombosis, and cesarean section carries 10 to 20-fold increase in thromboembolism, and emergency cesarean probably doubles the risk. And untreated DVT leads to pulmonary embolism, and untreated pulmonary embolism leads to mortality in 15%. This is as per CDC. And this clearly shows that normal vaginal delivery has lower risk. It is 10 per 100,000, 10,000 deliveries in a woman less than 35 with elective section, and with emergency section it is 20 per 10,000 deliveries. So the investigations that we do are easily available, Doppler ultrasound, which is convenient, less invasive, widely available with a sensitivity of 91% and specificity of 99%. If there is pelvic vein thrombosis, we could go for MRI venogram. D-dimers are not very useful. This is an algorithm that we have to follow. If there are clinical features of deep vein thrombosis, begin low molecular weight heparin and then for Doppler ultrasound. If it is negative, then you go for D-dimer. It's positive, then suspicion of iliac vein thrombosis and go for MRI. And if it is positive every time, you have to give low molecular weight heparin. This is what comes from New England Journal. And prompt treatment is necessary. Either you could go for unfractionated heparin with 40,000 units per day IV and maintenance of 10,000 units per subcutaneously BD. Or you could go for the low molecular weight heparin. The common ones used are enoxaparin, deltaparin, which are the common ones. And for our patient, we will require enoxaparin 80 milligrams twice daily. And prophylaxis for cesarean section, the most important thing is early ambulation alone is acceptable in low risk patients, and compression stockings with or without low molecular weight heparin for the moderate risk population. And for prophylaxis, you require enoxaparin, again 40 milligrams daily for a patient 50 to 90. This is our usual one. And the second case, I have taken a Gravida 4, a previous 3 LS years, Cesarean section was done in late night, which is a very wrong thing for antepartum hemorrhage with excessive bleeding per vaginum, which proved to be a placenta accreta, and she had a total hysterectomy. There was profuse bleeding during hysterectomy. Somehow the hemostasis was achieved. Next day, she has very little blood-stained urine and abdomen is distended with peritoneal fluid. So what is the case? What is the diagnosis? How do you confirm? This case should have had a scan done earlier to find out whether there is a placenta previa or which is going into the bladder. So this was not done, and previous cesarean with placenta previa should alert the possibility of placenta accreta. There was abdominal distension, little blood-stained urine and no evidence of shock. Bladder injury was more likely with intraperitoneal bleeding. In emergency cesarean section, cesarean hysterectomy, there is 9% chance of bladder injury. So a paracentesis was done in this case, and the peritoneal fluid was checked for urea and creatinine. And the high values confirmed that it is the urine that is there inside the abdominal cavity. And management, we went for laparotomy, broad spectrum antibiotics, repair of the bladder injury with the help of a urologist. So there are now, we all know about the guidelines for placenta accreta, elective cesarean at 36 weeks with adequate blood kept ready, total hysterectomy, bladder injury should be anticipated, take informed consent, a urologist to be present, and intra-op bladder injury suspected checked with methylene blue. The current management, we always go for classical cesarean section without removing the placenta and proceed to hysterectomy, which is the better option. We have got other non-invasive options, intraoperative internal iliac artery embolization being done in the radiology department or in the cardiology department people go for, and preoperative cannulation or prophylactic bilateral ligation of the internal iliac vessels, and endovascular placement of internal iliac occlusion balloon catheters. This is what they do in the cath labs. May be performed to prevent excessive blood loss. Isolation and temporary occlusion of the infrarenal aorta to reduce the bleeding and to allow the surgical team to assess and manage the situation effectively. So that is the second case. Now we go to the third case. A second gravida who had a cesarean section for an emergency procedure is presenting on the 14th day with profuse bleeding per vaginum. This was a scenario which was common yesteryears. Nowadays we don't see that often. How will you proceed with the manage this problem? How will you proceed if she has recurrent bouts of bleeding? This is a case of secondary PPH occurring for 24 hours to 42 days up to delivery, and causes may be retained products, not in this case because it's a cesarean section, infection, choriocarcinoma or pseudoaneurysm. Pseudoaneurysm or aneurysm is a permanent or local dilatation of an artery with a diameter more than 50% of the expected size, and infection or arterial trauma leading to a hematoma, which is the most common cause of pseudoaneurysm. And in this case, blood grouping and cross-matching and antibiotic was started and ultrasound was done. Ultrasound may show some clots inside the uterine cavity, but you should never go for a curettage or evacuation of these clots in the uterus. And MRI is useful for diagnosis. The MRI which shows the presence of a hematoma in the patient with vaginal bleeding 14 days. And laparotomy with closure of the uterine wound or abdominal hysterectomy or uterine artery embolization are some of the options. The surgical procedures have got their own morbidity and anesthesia complication, injuries to bladder or ureters, and infection and blood transfusion requirement, and a premature ovarian failure. That's why we go for uterine artery embolization either with polyvinyl alcohol or with gel form, which is injected after X-ray guidance and arteriography. This is a minimal invasive method and takes only 1 to 1.5 hours with an overnight stay. Patient is sedated and is awake during the procedure. Many women resume light activities within few days and return to normal work in 1 week. And this is the picture. The first one shows a pseudoaneurysm here. It has been cleared by uterine artery embolization. The side effects include moderate to severe pain and cramping over first few hours after the procedure, nausea or fever, infection or injury to uterus, which is very rare. So this is the thing that we have to promote. And again, case number 4 is an emergency cesarean section done for fetal distress related to cord prolapse with a midline vertical incision and sutures removed on the 3rd day with a serosanguinous discharge from the wound. Later the wound gave way. We know wound dehiscence can be partial or complete. Incomplete or partial, complete or evisceration or burst abdomen with a mortality of 30%. And peak incidence is 7th day. Pathognomonic sign is the serosanguinous discharge from the wound. And we always should identify the predisposing factors like metabolic factors like diabetes, mechanical factors like cough or something, radiotherapy or chemotherapy, bronchial asthma. These are the things which could give rise to a burst abdomen. And proper antibiotic and proper intraoperative techniques are very important. We should use the ideal suture material, especially for the rectus sheath, and non-irritant, non-infective and with good tensile strength, and correct operative techniques with the rectus sheath, which is closed ideally with a proline 1.5 to 2 centimeters from the edge and 1 centimeter apart. Black silk or for the skin or proline, and control the respiratory. That's most important. The respiratory condition or the metabolic condition has to be properly controlled. When you have the burst abdomen, immediate closure is the treatment of choice with basic investigation and antibiotic. Remove all necrotic tissue and clots, and suture, best suture material should be used. Culture has to be taken, inspection and lavage. And single layer closure with proline 2.5 to 3 centimeters from the skin edges, 2 centimeters apart. And post-operative management with nasogastric tube, appropriate broad spectrum antibiotics is important. So I go to the next case number 5, which is a previous cesarean section done as an elective procedure. Surprisingly, she presented irregular fever from the 6th post-op day. Antibiotics were given. As soon as the antibiotics stopped, she started fever and chills and pain in the left iliac fossa. What are the possibilities of this fever, recurrent fever? A temperature of 38 degrees centigrade or greater recorded on 2 occasions, 6 hours apart, more than 24 hours after surgical procedure is called puerperal fever. And cesarean section, we all know, is a clean, contaminated wound. And the major source of infection is the vagina. It has got a connection with the vagina. And the pathogens are aerobic, anaerobic organisms in the vagina. Hence, prophylactic antibiotics is a must in case of all cases of cesarean section. And depending upon the fever of a post-op patient, depending upon the time of onset, 0 to 2 days, it may be atelectasis, transfusion reactions or drug reaction, 3 to 5, bronchopneumonia, wound infection, phlebitis or abscess, and 5 to 7, deep vein thrombosis or specific surgical condition, more than 1 week, distant site, sepsis. So, clinical examination, respiratory, GIT, urinary tract, needle sites for any infection, and surgical wound examination, breast for engorgement, and pelvic examination, all was done. Everything was normal in this case. There was no abnormality detected. Investigations for septicemia like complete blood count, LFT, RFT, urine analysis, blood culture, ultrasound abdomen was done, and the report came as heterogeneous mass of mixed echogenicity with a bubble appearance, and this is query foreign body in the abdomen. And confirmation was done with CT scan, and laparotomy was done, and the foreign body was removed. So what is the prevention? Mop and instrument count by the surgeon himself, confirmed by the surgeon himself, especially in an emergency procedure and prolonged surgeries. Radio tag mops and display of the mop and instrument count before and after surgery, and in unexplained fever, think of this possibility, which is rare but can occur. Now the last case, probably a case of previous LSES, cesarean section done in Phanerstein incision, developed severe wound infection and necrotizing fasciitis on the 6th day. How do you manage? So what is necrotizing fasciitis? It is a post-operative gangrene with chronic enlarging ulcer due to microelophilic streptococcus and staphylococcus aureus. And identifying symptoms are extremely painful lesions which form in the second week, end of the first week and second week after surgery. And diagnostic features are dusky discoloration of the skin with rapid spread of change in patients, especially those who are immunocompromised. The ulcers that form in the center are covered by black eschar, see the eschar here, and encircled with a gangrenous margin. General toxicity and subcutaneous crepitus can be said. The key to the recovery is the early identification of the infection and prompt treatment. treatment is being a gram-positive organism, benzylpenicillin 2.5 grams IV 4 times daily, on metronidazole 500 milligram ekta hourly for 7 days. Linezolid is another thing that we can try, 600 milligram BDIV, and antibiotic depending upon the bacteriological findings. And surgical intervention is very, very important to do a proper surgical exploration and removal of the tissue, because it spreads very fast. Oh, one more case is there, 35-year-old primey with elective cesarean section for transverse lie. And 8 hours after, there was a big mass and 18 weeks gestation. How do you do? To differentiate a mass arising from the abdominal wall, intra-abdominal pathology, there is something called Carnot test. We place the patient in supine position, identify the site of maximum tenderness, make the patient sit up halfway up, and then identify the area, site increased tenderness. That means it is outside. If the tenderness is less, it is intra-abdominal pathology. Ultrasound will definitely help us to find out the layer where it is coming from. And rectus sheath hematoma comes as a bolt from the blue. It's an unusual cause of pain abdominal mass and bleeding into rectus sheath either from superior or inferior epigastric vessels. It's a self-limiting entity to a great extent. Unless hypovolemic shock occurs, then you have to go for surgery. Otherwise, it resolves, even though it's a large one, resolves over months. And broad ligament hematoma is a very, again, rare but sometimes seen. Upper vagina, cervix, and the tear occurs there, and most commonly after operative delivery trauma or even spontaneous vaginal delivery. It can either be going by itself by blood transfusion and resuscitation, but surgical exploration can also be given. But uterine artery embolization is another method by which you could control this broad ligament hematoma. So before I stop, let me say one of the preventive strategies to prevent complication. Have a good assistant and good lighting so that you can see it properly and do not miss vessels and perfect hemostasis. And make sure of the anatomy before making an incision on the uterus. Look at the round ligaments and put incision in between. And exteriorize the uterus if there is any problem, bleeding problem. And ensure perfect hemostasis before closure. Suture both ends of the cesarean section wound separately. Make cervical, see that the cervical os is open, especially in the case of elective cesarean section. Look beneath the rectus sheath and under the surface of the rectus muscle if there are bleeding vessels, especially we are stretching and Miss Gavladak. While cutting the parietal peritoneum, keep away from the fundus of the uterus. So with all this, let me say a big thank you for patient hearing.